Unbelievable Megatomb. The discovery of a megatomb has shocked archaeologists in Egypt. The tomb was found with over 100 coffins and countless artifacts hidden inside it. This discovery was made in Saqqara near Cairo. Experts don't know exactly what the purpose of the tomb was just yet, though they have said that judging by the precious items inside, it was used for wealthier members of society. Some of the artifacts are believed to be over 2,500 years old. Archaeologists uncovered a talisman likely used to protect dead spirits as they wandered into the underworld, as well as small statues buried beside the dead as good luck charms for their journey to the afterlife. Experts say the expensive treasures show how rich Egyptians were obsessed with burying their dead in a more commercialized fashion during the later periods of ancient Egypt. It was an actual industry of death. It also shows just how anxious they were about the next life. The wealthy Egyptians almost certainly read the Book of the Dead for any tips or pieces of advice on how to best bury their recently deceased friends and relatives. They probably did this in hopes that their own friends and relatives would do the same for them. Here's another interesting fact about this megatomb. The excavators found coffins crammed into just about every available space underground. This is further evidence that mummification in ancient Egypt was a commercial venture. Carpenters, statue makers, priests, and everyone else involved in the process benefited from maximum mummification. More mummies, more money. Biblical mystery. The Philistines are arguably one of the most mysterious groups of people mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. The most famous stories are perhaps that of David and the Philistine giant Goliath, as well as Samson and the Philistine Delilah. For many years, historians and archaeologists have been trying to figure out who the Philistines were and where did they come from. In 2016, archaeologists finally discovered the first known Philistine cemetery. It was located in Israel outside the walls of Ashkelon, an ancient Philistine city that lasted from the 12th to the 7th centuries BC. Containing more than 211 burials, National Geographic reported that the graves are giving archaeologists an opportunity to investigate the origins of the Philistines and their assimilation into local culture. Before this, their remains were so rare that archaeologists started to joke that maybe they were all buried at sea. That's why they couldn't find any. Until this landmark discovery was made, researchers had little to go on in terms of understanding the Philistines' burial practices and roots. The Bible paints the civilization out as a villainous, uncircumcised group that continuously warred with their Israelite neighbors. Artifacts reveal that the Philistines were much different from other local cultures of the time. They consumed pork and adhered to Aegean and Greek customs rather than Semitic practices. DNA analysis now shows that they actually descended from a group of seafaring Europeans, perhaps from Iberia or Greece, that arrived to Israel 3,000 years ago. Their pottery, architecture, and burial customs were quite different from everyone else. Their people were buried with very few grave goods. Some had a couple of pieces of pottery and very rarely pieces of jewelry. This one was found with some artifact on its face, which could have been some sort of eyepiece or something that was placed there after death. Some believe the Philistines were among the so-called Sea Peoples, a tribal confederation that terrorized the Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age. But the mysteries of their identity and their homeland endure, with researchers hoping that the recently discovered burial sheds some light on their many unanswered questions. Frozen mummies. At the edge of the Arctic, mummified members of an unknown civilization were recently dug out of the permafrost. This amazing discovery happened at the burial site of Zeleny Yar, which was once a necropolis used by very early humans living in Siberia. According to Alexander Gusev, the researcher who led the expedition, they discovered the mummified remains of an adult and a baby all wrapped up, lying next to one another. The bodies had been cocooned in copper, fur, and bark, buried with their feet facing the river. Someone had taken great care to bundle up the bodies tightly in thick fabric, then wrapped them in layers and layers of birch bark. The adult, once fully wrapped in their cocoon, was covered from the tip of their toes to the top of their head with copper plates. As for the baby, it was only covered in small copper fragments, but there were also some other artifacts that archaeologists can't really see yet. The team removed the mummies along with as much soil and dirt as possible so they could protect it, and then study everything later in more detail. The archaeologists were so shocked by the amazing preservation of the adult mummy that they haven't even risked opening the cocoon yet. It's now being preserved at a laboratory in Russia, waiting for scientists to perform some non-intrusive analysis to discover more about this ancient people. Antique artillery shells. In New Jersey, a landscaper made an explosive discovery. His name is Ed George, and he was working with his crew at a home in Cape May, New Jersey, when they uncovered 3 unexploded artillery shells. According to George, these things looked like giant bullets, absolutely massive underneath the lawn of this perfectly ordinary house. The discovery led to the entire area being evacuated for 2 days, while authorities worked to get rid of the dangerous bombs. According to the professionals, the artillery shells dated all the way back to World War II. But how in the world did giant artillery shells from the war make it underneath a suburban lawn in New Jersey? It may not have had anything to do with the military. The man who previously owned the home was a collector of antiques who died in 2020. He may have collected these bombs as part of his hobby, then simply buried them under his lawn and neglected to tell anyone. Kind of a dangerous hobby, don't you think? Oh yes, I collect artillery shells from World War II and then bury them in my backyard. Luckily, explosives experts were able to take the artillery shells away and safely detonate them. And it's a good thing, too. If one of these shells had exploded, it probably would have caused the other 2 to explode as well, potentially blowing the entire house to smithereens. Ritual tools. In Egypt, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities just announced the discovery of a huge treasure trove of ancient tools that were likely used in religious rituals. Archaeologists say they were probably collected and put in one spot because the local priests feared an incoming invasion. And since they were found in such good condition given how old they are, it looks like they were successful in protecting them. They were discovered inside the Temple of the Pharaohs, north of Cairo. Researchers say some of the tools were likely used in daily religious ceremonies that honored the goddess Hathor. This assumption is based on a large limestone sculpture of Hathor, which was found along with the tools. There were ancient incense burners, a set of clay figurines, and even some small statues of the gods Taweret and Thoth. Hathor was the deity of pregnant women, music, and happiness. It was probably women expecting to give birth who visited the temple and used the figurines, incense burners, and other religious instruments in rituals to safeguard the births of their children. Among the tools discovered, there were things like birthing chairs, offering plates, an eye made of pure gold, and materials used for gilding, all found together in the same place. Strange cemetery. During a routine excavation in the Leith Port area of Edinburgh, Scotland, archaeologists got quite the shock when they found a medieval cemetery filled with the remains of hundreds of people. It was just a normal day in anticipation of a planned public transportation line in 2008, but it turned into a much bigger dig. There are no known records of anyone being buried at the site since the street it sits along was built in 1790. Consequently, the transportation project came to a screeching halt while experts dug deeper. They unearthed over 380 burials altogether, with the oldest dating as far back as the 14th century. The newest graves date back to the time of the cemetery's closure around 1650. Since then, plans for the tram extension were reinstated and excavations resumed. Another 359 skeletons were found after COVID-19 restrictions were lifted last year, bringing the total number of bodies discovered at the site to over 750. The graveyard constitutes one of the largest burials from its time period ever found in Scotland, as well as the largest collection of skeletons in Edinburgh. The next step is for researchers to analyze the skeletons in hopes of learning more about who the deceased individuals were and what their lives were like. One separate, isolated grave found beneath the other graves, who appears to be a female, was found in a pit measuring 33 feet across and 10 to 13 feet deep. She was buried in a crouching position and facing in a different direction than the traditional Christian burials. Why? No clue. The grave likely predates the rest of the cemetery's burials, and it seems to have nothing in common with any medieval features at the site or nearby. But experts are unsure how old the burial is or the circumstances of the woman's life or death. They hope to learn more through radiocarbon dating and isotopic analysis. The Frozen Scarecrow. Back in 1939, the Soviets wanted the Finns to move their border over a few miles, handing over the land to the USSR so that they could construct a naval base and create a buffer zone around the city of Leningrad. the Finnish people refused to move their border, resulting in what we know of today as the Winter War. Almost immediately, the Soviets began massing troops along the border of Finland. It was pretty brutal, seeing as Finland had around 3 million people, while the Soviet Union had around 171 million people. In a bizarre attempt to keep their borders secure, Finnish soldiers started taking the frozen corpses of Soviet soldiers and mounting them on sticks like scarecrows. The Soviets were shocked to come across bodies completely frozen in the snow, hard as stone, sticking up, making everything quite creepy. It was minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit during the Winter War, so soldiers often dropped dead of hypothermia rather than bullet wounds. The Finnish people then used these frozen bodies and would pose them to intimidate their Soviet enemies. The bodies were all taken down after the war, but there are still some disturbing photos of ice scarecrows floating around as a reminder of those terrifying dark days. Human skeletons. While digging a drain hole behind a house in Wiltshire, England earlier this year, building contractor Robbie Kearney hit something he shouldn't have. He struck some bones, so he ordered everything to a halt. He assumed that they were animal bones until he dug up a human skull, at which point the crew immediately stopped working and notified the homeowners, who called the police. Forensic experts came in and tentatively identified one skeleton and then another, then another. There were 3 adults and 1 child among the remains, which they think may date as far back as the 5th century during the early medieval period. At the last update, they were trying to figure out the individuals' ages and when they died, which they said could take a while. Found near a 12th century church, these skeletons may have been buried in a plague pit, according to local historian Joe Charlesworth, who told the local papers that there are rumors of multiple plague pits existing throughout the town. It's pretty bad luck to have one of them be right in your backyard, though. Nobody wants skeletons. Archaeologists told the public that they plan to continue keeping an eye on drainage work in the area in case there are more skeletons waiting to be found. Who knows what could be buried in your garden? Have you checked? Artifacts from the Kharkov battle. The second attempt at the liberation of Kharkov took place in May of 1942. The area was controlled by the Germans, and the Soviets desperately wanted to take it back. They launched an offensive that resulted in a huge battle being waged near Kharkov and the village of Barvenkovo. During the fighting, the Red Army lost nearly 300,000 soldiers. The offensive was a massive failure and the Red Army was utterly defeated, with the Germans capturing thousands of prisoners of war. All these years later, archaeologists decided to do some excavations in the region to see what they could uncover. They ended up stumbling upon a field literally ripe with the remains of dead soldiers. They also found a small horde of artifacts from the war, such as Soviet coins, spoons and forks, abandoned rifles, and rusty cartridges. One of the excavation sites revealed a small collection of rotten skeletons, nearly 24 of them. Because the fighting had been so brutal and the Soviets were forced to retreat unexpectedly, there wasn't exactly enough time to take all the bodies away. This means in the fields around Kharkov, dead soldiers, just like the poor souls recently discovered, are still waiting to be uncovered and taken to be properly buried. Ancient family feuds. The translation of a mysterious will written 3,000 years ago in Egypt has revealed some shocking links between the ancient Egyptians and the people of today. The document is called the Will of Naunacht, and it tells the story of an old woman with 8 children. More than that, it tells the story of a serious family dispute. You see, the woman had decided that only some of her children would be the recipient of her estate. In this ancient will, she clearly expresses anger at some of her children for not taking care of her when she started getting old. See? Gotta take care of your parents. Naunacht lived in Thebes near the end of the New Kingdom period, with her last will and testaments being created in November of 1147 BC. This was the 3rd year that Ramses V ruled over Egypt. She had first been married to a scribe, then to a workman who specialized in the creation of tombs. But what you might find really fascinating is that just like other women in ancient Egypt, she had legal rights equal to ancient Egyptian men. She decided that upon her death, she would distribute her wealth the way she saw fit, and this likely increased the turmoil within her family. Naunacht very specifically divided up her valuable copper assets to certain children, then forbade those children from sharing the copper assets with their other siblings. She basically denounces the bad children who wouldn't take care of her and gives all of her washing bowls, knickknacks, and other pieces of property only to her favorite children. Scandalous. Ancient Egyptians, they were just like us. Medici mystery. Born in 1498 as Ludovico de' Medici, Giovanni dalle Bandiere was a Medici warrior who was exiled from Florence at just 12 years old for committing a murder. He went on to establish a fierce reputation for his violent spirit, which made him a skilled 16th century mercenary and military captain. The Medici popes Leo X and Clement VII hired him to fight for them, and he became quite famous during his day, believed to be practically invincible. However, in 1526, a cannonball struck Giovanni, requiring the amputation of his right leg above the knee. He reportedly died shortly after surgery, possibly from gangrene. In 2013, the man's remains were exhumed from his burial at Medici chapels in Florence. His femur was intact, with only the lower leg and foot removed, telling a seemingly different story than what's on record. But what that story is, or might be, has yet to be determined. Describing Giovanni as a vigorous man measuring about 5 feet 8 inches tall, investigation leader paleopathologist Gino Fornaciari explained that the man's bones bore clear evidence of carrying heavy armor and riding horses dating back to his teenage years. Fornaciari added that experts hope to clarify the nature of Giovanni's wounds and what type of surgery he had. Zombie plants. Frozen zombie plants from the last miniature ice age have just been revived after spending 400 years encased in ice. In an unprecedented act of science, experts managed to recover the frozen plants from melting Canadian glaciers and were actually able to bring them back to life. The scientists involved in the study referred to the structural preservation of these plants as exceptional. In the laboratory, they were able to grow them as if nothing had happened. What? I can barely keep a houseplant alive. Scientists now know that some plants are significantly tougher than previously thought, clearly, able to bounce back even after spending centuries entombed in ice. The resurrected plants were taken from the Teardrop Glacier, located in the northern territory of Nunavut. This particular glacier has been melting at an alarmingly fast rate, at over 12 feet each year. Thanks to the rapid melting, plants that were frozen hundreds of years ago are suddenly being revealed. Researchers from the University of Alberta were exploring the glacier when they stumbled upon the black remains of what they thought were dead plants. So they stuck them in buckets and took them home. The scientists managed to date the plants back to around the year 1550 AD, when the world experienced a brief ice age that lasted for 300 years. Brief in terms of world history, but kind of long given our lifespan. Scientists can't exactly say what this discovery means for humankind as a whole. All they know is that when it comes to plants, even being frozen for hundreds of years can't stop their growth. Probably a good reason to freeze some seeds in case the apocalypse comes. World War II bomb. It's not uncommon for explosives from past wars to be found buried in terrifyingly close proximity to places where people live, work, and socialize daily. A humongous 550-pound World War II-era bomb was recently discovered during a community cleanup event in the Australian coastal town of Barwon Heads. Antiques dealer Ian Royce came and removed it from a resident's backyard, loaded it onto his truck, and drove it to his shop. He told local media outlet 9 News that the bomb was a sea mine, which would have been chained to the bottom of the ocean during the war. It was jam-packed with TNT and equipped with small, sensitive spines, which would detonate the weapon at even the slightest touch from a passing ship. Many of the bombs were decommissioned and repurposed as backyard incinerators after the war, which would explain how the recently discovered explosive ended up where it was found. Back then, there were no pickup services for organic waste or green rubbish, so people simply burned it in their backyards. The good news is that because the bomb was decommissioned, it didn't pose a threat to anyone's safety. Royce is selling the artifact for an asking price of 1,200 Australian dollars. But not all World War II explosives that turn up in populated places are safe to go near. In Orlando, Florida, thousands of homes were built over a military bombing range that was riddled with bombs. Residents first learned about this in 2007, when an explosive was found near the running track at a local middle school. Since then, over 400 live bombs and rockets have been found on the school's property and in people's backyards. The Army Corps of Engineers carried out a $10 million cleanup. There is still a chance that someone could stumble upon a live explosive, but at this point it's unlikely. Still, would you want to take your chances? Enormous lost torpedo. An absolutely massive German bomb was discovered completely by accident by a fishing vessel off the coast of the United Kingdom. The vessel accidentally dragged the unexploded piece of ordnance up in its fishing nets. The fishermen were shocked when they saw the huge bomb sitting on the floor of their boat, looking extremely similar to an enormous bullet. They first thought it was a torpedo, perhaps left behind by some kind of war submarine. The crew immediately contacted the authorities, who sent out a Royal Navy bomb disposal unit in the middle of the night to take care of the situation. As it turned out, this supposed torpedo was actually an SC-500 bomb, something that was used by the Germans during World War II. They dropped these types of bombs from airplanes to destroy ships, cities, or whatever else they had in their sights. This one was probably meant to hit a ship but missed, sank to the bottom of the ocean, and sat there for 75 years. The Royal Navy took the enormous bomb further out to sea, where they performed a controlled explosion at about 7 o'clock in the morning. They lowered it back to the seabed before blowing it up. That way it couldn't cause any accidental damage to passing vessels. The local sea life, however, did not get the same courtesy. New but ancient mummy. A bizarre mummy thought to be 4,000 years old has just been discovered while archaeologists excavated a mysterious burial chamber. Apparently, the remains have left experts a little confused. This newest discovery was made by the archaeologist Martina Bardonova, who was working in the southern Egyptian city of Aswan. Her Spanish research team was looking into the reign of the first female Egyptian ruler, Hatshepsut. They discovered a tomb that had never before been opened, and were extremely lucky to find a coffin that had remained hidden from looters for thousands of years. Within the coffin was the mysterious mummy. According to Martina herself, the mummy was ugly. In fact, she said it wasn't even really a mummy, just a dead person that had been really poorly bandaged. The deceased was an old woman when she was put inside the tomb, her body shrouded in a black material and jammed into a terracotta coffin. Bone experts are currently trying to get more details on the dead lady, so far only figuring out her age. But in fact, it's her age that has left the experts baffled. She was at least 70 years old when she died, maybe even more. This is outrageous because people almost never lived over the age of 25. Most people in ancient Egypt died from some kind of infection and were in the ground before they ever hit 30. A significant portion of women also died giving birth. Nobody has any idea how this woman lived to be 70, as there was nothing in Egyptian society to help the elderly. If she truly was that old, it was a total fluke. What do you think was her secret? Ancient Egyptian yoga? Meditation? Special diet? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Tel Cadesh horde. Sometime during the late 2nd century BC, or 2,600 years ago, someone buried a collection of personal belongings at the archaeological site of Tel Cadesh, along the modern-day Israel-Lebanon border. The items include a terracotta figurine of the god Eros, better known as Cupid, as well as 23 glass game pieces, a pair of metal writing instruments, and a hairpin made from bone. These objects all showed skilled craftsmanship, and their personal nature captured archaeologists' attention. They were mostly in good condition, indicating that they had been deliberately buried together. Game pieces from the ancient world are very unique. Archaeologist Adi Ehrlich sought to understand how and why the artifacts ended up buried together. He points out that while it was customary to find a few ancient game pieces here and there, it was highly unusual to come across 23 of them at once. Ehrlich explained that the only imaginable scenario where it would make sense would be with the burial of a child or adolescent, where game pieces may have been given as funerary offerings. Archaeologist Adi found a poem about a young woman named Hippa, who buried some items as part of a pre-wedding ritual. The poem's author, known only as Antipater, had a rather common name for the time. But there are records of a poet by this name who lived near where the Tel Cadesh hoard was discovered, suggesting that whoever buried the objects might have done so for the same reasons that Hippa did. Perhaps it was some sort of tradition before marriage. Get married and the games are over. It's highly unlikely that experts will ever know for sure why someone buried the hoard of trinkets, but this seems the most likely. Ancient bison stew. During the last ice age, a special breed of bison roamed from what is today Spain across Europe and Russia into China and beyond to Canada. It hung out with ancient horses, the woolly rhinoceros, and even the woolly mammoth. In fact, the ancient steppe bison is one of the oldest animals ever drawn by humans, found in prehistoric caves throughout Europe. But unfortunately, the bison went extinct roughly 8,000 years ago. In its absence, the American bison became the most prevalent of its kind throughout North America. North of Fairbanks in Alaska during the gold rush back in 1976, a family of miners discovered the immaculately preserved carcass of one of these extinct bison. It was the corpse of a large male encased in a block of ice. The creature was gigantic, dated to be 36,000 years old, and he was also blue. The family named the prehistoric beast Blue Babe after Paul Bunyan's mythical companion. They realized the specimen was unique, so they got a hold of a paleontologist from the University of Alaska named Dale Guthrie. Dale and his team then melted the layer of ice around the dead bison and performed an in-depth analysis. So, why was he blue? When the bison started to decompose, the animal tissue reacted with iron in the soil, creating a coat of white vivianite. When it was exposed to the air, it turned into a brilliant shade of blue. What they discovered is that the bison was probably killed by another extinct animal from the Ice Age, a prehistoric lion. The attack probably went down in winter, so the bison's remains were frozen solid. The team managed to bring the dead bison back to the University of Alaska Museum and preserve it for generations to come. But in 1984, right before the specimen went on exhibit, they did something a little strange. Dale extracted a bit of meat from the bison's neck and used it to make a stew. This bizarre experiment turned out to be quite enlightening. Nobody got sick from the stew. Everyone who ate it said the bison meat tasted just like ordinary beef. And thanks to the brave diners, we now know that frozen meat is still edible 36,000 years later. If given the chance, would you dare eat bison stew made from 36,000-year-old meat? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you are new here. I want to give a big shout out to Adam Shiflett and Chris Hadwin. Thanks so much for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you. Largest ever Anglo-Saxon coin hoard. While metal detecting outside his home in East Norfolk, England in 1990, an amateur treasure hunter found an old coin. Over the next 30 years, he amassed 131 more pieces on his property, amounting to what's being described as the largest ever Anglo-Saxon coin hoard ever discovered. That's a lot of patient dedication to the hobby. 30 years? It rivals the size of the famous Sutton Hoo hoard, which has more gold but fewer coins. Most of the coins are Frankish tremises dating back between 580 and 630 AD. The collection also consists of 9 larger Roman coins called solidi, as well as some gold jewelry and pendants. Experts have already learned some things they didn't know before about early 7th century trade in the region. For example, the hoard shows that coins from outside the area were used before currency started being minted locally. A specialist is examining the artifacts to determine if they qualify as treasure under the Treasure Act. This designation would automatically hand ownership of the hoard over to the Crown to ensure that the items are kept off the black market and made available for the public to enjoy. Anything that's over 300 years old and made from more than 10% precious metals usually falls into this category. A bummer for the gentleman that has amassed the hoard, but it will mean many get to enjoy his collection. German bunker in a Roman fort. Excavations on the island of Alderney in the Channel Islands have revealed a bunker built by the Nazis during World War II. But this bunker is unlike any other from the war. The Nazis used the preserved ruins of a Roman fortress as the base for their operations. They used what was already there to fortify their own bunker, which they occupied from between 1940 and 1945. The Channel Islands are the only place in British territory that the Germans seized successfully. They actually built a couple of Nazi concentration camps here that most people don't even know exist. The Channel Islands also happen to have the best preserved Roman fortresses anywhere in Britain. What's really amazing is that nobody found this Nazi base until just now. According to archaeologist Jason Monaghan, one of the leading researchers involved in the new discovery, the Nazi troops placed their base exactly inside the walls of the Roman fortification. Because the Romans built their fort with walls 10 feet thick, it was the perfect natural barrier. When the archaeologists started their excavations, they had no idea what was going on. There were different levels of floors that all seemed to be from different eras. But as they continued their investigations, they realized this could only have been the work of the Nazis. In fact, there was only one part of the ancient fortress, which was originally built 1700 years ago, that the Nazis didn't ruin. It's called a sunroom, and the Romans would have used it for a bit of rest and relaxation during the warm English summer. The Mysteries of Osiris. In the sacred Egyptian city of Abydos, there was once a religious festival dedicated to the god Osiris. It was a celebration of death and resurrection, one of the most important festivals that the ancient Egyptians had. Osiris was the lord of the afterlife, and nothing was more important in Egyptian society than what happened to a person after their body was put to rest. This ancient festival was so important, with people so obsessed with being blessed by Osiris, that everyone who could afford it erected a small chapel along the procession route, complete with offerings for the god of the dead. The procession started at the Temple of Osiris, then traveled into the desert. And while Egyptologists can't do much except imagine what the great festival looked like, they have found plenty of reliefs in the city of Abydos showing the festivities. Based on ancient pieces of art, stone tablets, and reliefs on temple walls, this was a celebration on the same level as Christmas. If you could go back and participate in the Great Festival of Osiris, would you? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We have lots of videos like these coming up. Ancient puppy. Speaking of frozen critters, an ancient puppy was recently discovered frozen in the Siberian permafrost. The puppy dates back 18,000 years and seems to be an ancestor of both wolves and dogs. DNA tests have been inconclusive, with experts not able to determine whether the small canine was a wild beast or a domesticated friend. But it might play a very important role in understanding who were the first people to domesticate dogs and where our best friends come from. The puppy's name is Dogor, and it was found by locals in the frigid Siberian wasteland in 2018. Thanks to the unusually warm winter, the puppy had emerged from the ice so amazingly preserved that it still had its teeth, its whiskers, its eyelashes, and all of its internal organs. Researchers were able to figure out that the animal was only 2 months old at the time of its death, though they can't say why it died. The DNA was sequenced by the best in the world at the Center for Paleogenetics in Sweden. The DNA told them that the dog was a male, somewhere along the evolutionary track between a wild wolf and a domesticated dog that could be a common canine ancestor, or even an extinct kind of wolf that died during the Ice Age. A forgotten homeowner. This is a very strange true crime case. Earlier this year, someone tipped police off about some suspicious activity at 82-year-old Lucille Payne's home in Las Vegas. They noticed some suspiciously disturbed dirt in her yard, which was really not a good sign. Police found her dismembered and buried in a shallow grave. Officers soon learned that nobody had seen or heard from Miss Payne since 2018. She had no family, and nobody else had noticed that she was missing and looked for her. Her bills were set to auto-pay, so none of the companies she paid every month were after her for money, which may have alerted someone to her death sooner. Police found squatters in Lucille's home and initially suspected them of murder. They explained that they had found her mummified body inside the home earlier this year. Seeing the situation as an opportunity for financial gain, they cut up her remains and buried them in her backyard. These shameless freeloaders lived in Lucille's house while draining her bank account, and they sold some of her belongings, including her car. Neighbors told local news that the house had seemed vacant for a few years, and that they had heard digging in the yard in recent weeks. The squatters haven't been charged in the case, but the possibility is still on the table. Even if they didn't murder Lucille, they allegedly committed fraud and disposed of her body in an unlawful way. Detectives are still trying to find Miss Payne's next of kin while they decide what next steps to take as far as the home intruders go. In the meantime, her estate is selling her house. In the aftermath of the sad situation, Lieutenant Ray Spencer took the opportunity to remind people to check on their neighbors during an interview with local papers. He had a good point. While Lucille's community certainly isn't at fault for the disturbing events that took place at her home, the outcome may have been much different if someone had spoken up when they noticed that her house seemed vacant. Do you have a good relationship with your neighbors, or do you prefer really high fences? Let me know in the comments below. And now for number 5, but first it's shoutout time. Wanted to give a big shout out to Daniel Rue and Sarah Kay. I'm so happy to have such nice subscribers, and I hope you are all having a wonderful day wherever you are. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family because we have lots more videos about amazing and spooky discoveries coming up. The Deepest Shipwreck. For the first time in history, the deepest known shipwreck in the world has been mapped and filmed by a crew from the United States. The ship operated during World War II as a destroyer, named the USS Johnson. Researchers found it at a dizzying depth of 21,180 feet in the Philippine Sea. And while its location has been known ever since the war, nobody could actually go down there and look at it until just recently, because the technology just wasn't there. Caledon Oceanic is the company that finally reached the deepest shipwreck ever. They used the research vessel DSV limiting factor to reach the ghostly ruin of the ship, over 4 miles beneath the surface of the ocean. It took 2 trips of 8 hours each to fully map the shipwreck and get all the necessary images. While they can't exactly bring it back and refurbish it, it was still amazing for everyone to get a look at the destroyer. How did the USS Johnson end up at the bottom of the ocean in the first place? It was sunk by Japanese forces on October 25, 1944. It was the Battle of Samar, one of the 4 major naval battles fought against the Japanese, and one of the biggest clashes in naval warfare history. The USS Johnson attacked the superior Japanese force of 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and at least 11 destroyers. The Johnson managed to do a fair bit of damage, but after 2.5 hours, it was crippled, had no power, and was surrounded. The captain had no choice but to abandon ship with his crew, then deliberately sink the ship to keep it out of the hands of the Japanese. Artifact in a cigar box. An ancient Egyptian artifact from 5,000 years ago was recently discovered in a very unusual place. The artifact dates back to between 3341 and 3094 BC, before the construction of the Great Pyramid. It was retrieved from the Queen's Chamber inside the pyramid back in 1872, one of only 3 items found inside the chamber. It's a piece of cedar only about 5 inches long. It was found with a small ball and a bronze hook, with the latter 2 artifacts currently being held at the British Museum in London. The engineer, Wayneman Dixon, found it during excavations, then handed it over to Dr. James Grant, who had gone to Egypt in the 1860s to treat cholera. The fragment of cedar was eventually donated to the University of Aberdeen, though it mysteriously went missing 70 years ago. It was just rediscovered by a curatorial assistant named Abir El-Adani. The assistant was looking through the archives when she came across a cigar box with the Egyptian flag on it. It didn't quite look right, so she opened the box up to check. All she found was a small piece of wood. She didn't know what the fragment was immediately, though it was clearly important. It also clearly had something to do with Egypt, which piqued her curiosity since she herself is Egyptian. She soon found out the significance of the item, which had apparently been mislabeled, improperly classified, and then lost in the archives. One of the only things to ever be found inside the Great Pyramid was literally sitting in a cigar box in a glorified broom closet in a Scottish university for almost 100 years. Nobody knows what the fragment of wood was used for, though most experts agree it was probably from a piece of material used in the construction of the pyramid. It has since been properly labeled and will likely be put on display with the other 2 artifacts in London. Moche Ruins. In 2018, archaeologists announced the discovery of many ruins and artifacts that the cryptic Moche culture left behind. Found at the Huaca Limón de Ucupe site in northern Peru's Lambayeque region, it dates back some 1,500 years. The ruins consist of 5 raised pyramid-like adobe structures and 2 chambers, one which was used for meetings and the other that was used as a banquet hall. The hall is decorated with large murals measuring as high as 32 feet, featuring sea lions, fish, and other marine creatures. There are 2 thrones that face one another, one which a ruler would have sat on, while the other, lower seat, would have been used for making offerings. The building was clearly intended for ceremonial gatherings among Moche nobility, according to Chief Archaeologist Walter Alva, who spoke with National Geographic. Its discovery constitutes the first physical evidence of these events actually happening, whereas before, they were only seen in the culture's artwork. For unknown reasons, the structure was ultimately partially disassembled, concealed, and then abandoned. The Moche civilization's collapse around 700 AD is also a mystery. Some experts believe that El Niño brought severe flooding from the nearby river, and that the extreme weather played a role in the society's collapse. But what really happened remains a mystery. And now for a little-known culture that you've probably never heard of. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Nayem Abid and Erica Russell. You guys are awesome, and thanks so much for supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Origins Explained family. Glacier Plain. A heat wave recently unveiled a lost warplane from the Second World War that was hidden beneath the ice for 72 years. The warplane was a United States military transport aircraft flying from Austria to Italy back in 1946. But before it could ever make it to its destination, a snowstorm forced the aircraft to make a crash landing in the Bernese Alps. The 12 servicemen on board were rescued by Swiss soldiers after spending 5 days trapped on the frozen mountain. However, the C-53 Skytrooper, also known as a Dakota, was beyond rescue. They had no choice but to leave it on the mountain, and in the following years, the airplane was buried under layers of snow and ice and forgotten. In August 2018, temperatures in the Swiss Alps soared and caused a lot of places to melt for the first time in many years. The unusually warm weather up in the mountains finally revealed the plane. Investigators discovered tin cans, old spoons, and all kinds of ordinary items inside the crashed plane. Buried headstones. Seattle is a somewhat young city, so its archaeological record isn't nearly as rich as it might be in a place like London or Paris. But it also has its fair share of fascinating finds. Every year, 2 or 3 headstones are found on homeowners' properties. Local resident Brian Vaughn first dug up a chunk of someone's grave marker around 20 years ago while working in his garden. It seemed like a fairly normal discovery at first, but Vaughn kept turning up more and more headstone fragments. He eventually learned that they had been used as fill, and he didn't feel right throwing them away, so he repurposed them as doorstops for his greenhouse and his shed. It turns out that the concrete chunks came from temporary grave markers, which were used until a permanent headstone was installed at someone's grave, according to state anthropologist Guy Tassa. He pointed out that it was actually a bit unusual that they were used for fill. Even more oddly, the names and details on the headstones don't match up with the state's vital statistics records. There may be spelling errors or inaccurate birth or death dates on the stones, which would explain why the information can't be matched with official documents. Vaughn recently found his first complete headstone while rototilling. It belonged to someone named Andrew Olson, and he's not quite sure what to do with it, so for now, it's sitting in his yard. Who knows what else Vaughn might found in his backyard? It seems like the discoveries are endless. What would you do if you turned up a gravestone in your backyard? Let me know in the comments below. Lost letter. Eileen Pfaff has been living in her home in Shenandoah for 16 years, but the piece of history that she just found hidden in her basement goes back much further. Her son Michael was working in the basement when he uncovered a mysterious letter from World War II, preserved inside a piece of plastic. The letter came out of a hole in the wall, which had been filled with dirt. After digging the letter out of the wall, he saw that it was dated December 31st, 1942. The letter was addressed to Mickey. It was written by a soldier who wanted to wish his family a Merry Christmas. And while this may sound heartwarming, the letter then takes a dark turn. Whoever wrote it warned Mickey not to write him again because he was shipping out later that day. Considering the letter was so important that it was preserved in plastic and then buried within the walls of the house, chances are this unfortunate soldier may not have made it back from the war. Since making the shocking discovery, Eileen and her son have been trying to find the original owner. The letter must belong to somebody, and the family of the soldier would probably be happy to have it. Unfortunately, no one has yet come forward to claim the letter, leaving the fate of the unknown soldier a compelling mystery. Do you have any family stories from World War II? Let me know in the comments below. My grandfather was a colonel in the Air Force, but he didn't like to talk about it. And now for number 4. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to DragonKiss76 and Kieran from DIY Eco Projects. Thanks so much for your support. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and join the Origins Explained family. Mysterious Cemetery. A giant cemetery has been discovered in the middle of the Egyptian desert, with at least 250 previously unexplored tombs. This is one of the biggest discoveries of the past decade, since nobody had any clue that there were hundreds of tombs carved into the side of a hill in the eastern desert. And to make things even more shocking, the tombs date back as far as 4,200 years ago and as recent as 2,100 years. The discovery was made 240 miles away from Cairo, with the tombs made throughout various parts of Egyptian history. The oldest was during what Egyptologists referred to as the Old Kingdom. It was near the end of the Old Kingdom when the great pharaohs began losing control as individual governors gained too much power, dividing the country. The most recent tombs are from a time when Egypt was controlled by pharaohs descended from the generals of Alexander the Great, right before Cleopatra VII died, and Egypt was turned into a Roman province. But just what exactly did the archaeologists find inside the tombs? To be honest, nothing too exciting. They found typical artifacts like cups, plates, small vessels, symbolic offerings for the dead, and strange spherical vessels used to hold liquids, perhaps perfume. They also discovered that a lot of the tombs held both human and animal remains. And that's one mystery that nobody has quite been able to solve yet. The Promontory Culture. During the 1930s, a young anthropologist was exploring the north shore of Utah's Great Salt Lake when he found some curious artifacts in some caves. He carefully cataloged hundreds of moccasins, moccasin parts, bison bone, pottery, arrows, stone tools, and all kinds of things, and then sent them to the University of Utah. Then came the Great Depression as well as World War II, so the mysterious moccasin sat forgotten. But now, archaeologists are on the trail of this little-known ancient culture, now known as the Promontory Culture, after the caves the artifacts were found in. Archaeologists have gone back to the caves to better understand who lived here. The staggering amount of moccasins is extremely rare, since most of these types of items disintegrate over time. The style of these shoes was just like those from the Canadian subarctic, so finding them in caves in Utah is a little out of place. They were unlike the moccasins of nearby groups and closely resembled those worn by the Dene people, who lived much further north. This suggests that the Promontory Caves inhabitants were Dene ancestors, according to geochemical archaeologist Dr. Jessica Metcalf. The team studied over 200 pieces of footwear from the caves, with 82% of the shoes worn by children 12 and under. Researchers examined chemical traces in the shoes to reconstruct the movement of the people who wore them. An isotope analysis of an ankle strap revealed that the people who had lived in the caves had subarctic Dene roots, and that they traveled pretty far south of the Great Salt Lake, perhaps into the American Southwest, where Dene-speaking populations still exist today. The conclusion so far is that it appears as though Dene connections go back much further than scientists originally thought, with long-distance migrations starting many centuries ago. The city of Ur. Famously mentioned in the Bible as the place where Abraham fled to from Canaan, the ancient Sumerian city-state of Ur was thought to be a mythical place. But once again, it turned out to be real. In fact, it flourished as a prosperous trade center even before it was mentioned in scripture. Founded around 3800 BC in what is now Iraq, the powerful Persian Gulf port city was home to as many as 80,000 residents at its peak. Ur was continuously inhabited until around 450 BC, when changing temperatures and droughts prompted the population to abandon the site and migrate northward toward more fertile territory. An Italian explorer rediscovered Ur in 1625 when he traveled through the area and found bricks and other artifacts bearing strange inscriptions. At the time, the city's ruins were buried beneath the sand. British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the site in 1922 and found that what's left of Ur is largely reduced to rubble. I mean, it was around a really long time ago. The city's most visible surviving remnant is a partially restored ziggurat that was unearthed during the 1930s. Originally constructed during the 21st century BC, The structure was rebuilt by Babylon's final king, Nabonidus, during the 6th century BC. Over the centuries, the coastline has changed, and Ur's few surviving remnants sit much further inland compared to the city's location during its heyday, when it was situated near the coast and the mouth of the Euphrates River. The ruins are helping archaeologists gain a better understanding of the culture, but their knowledge is admittedly limited to what's available at the site, and the once powerful city of Ur remains an enigma. Mysterious frozen caveman. A bizarre caveman stuck in what looks like a block of ice was recently discovered along a trail in a Minneapolis park. The mysterious caveman sculpture has been confusing local hikers who find it along their path. It's been compared to the mysterious Utah monument found last November, since nobody knew where it came from or who put it there. It's obviously not an alien monolith dropped from space, but it is highly unusual. The first people to find the frozen caveman quickly realized that it wasn't actually trapped in a block of ice, but instead secured inside a brick of plastic. The caveman inside is actually a sculpture of a Neanderthal. After a bit of mystery and online speculation, the maker of the frozen caveman came forward to claim it as his own creation. He's an artist named Zach Schumach. Zach told local TV news that he wanted to make something people could have fun with in the great outdoors that didn't involve their phone or the internet. He hoped the unusual site would encourage people to go out, explore the parks, and check out the trails. Did it work? Do you want to go hiking now? Let me know in the comments below. New snake species. At the height of the COVID panini, much of the world went into lockdown, so most people had a lot more time on their hands than usual and needed to find ways to entertain themselves. When a stay-at-home order came to India, a college student named Virendra Bhardwaj started paying more attention to his backyard in Chamba, a town that sits at the foot of the Himalayas. He snapped photos of the creatures he observed right outside his home, including snakes, lizards, frogs, and insects, and shared the images on social media with people who were probably just as bored as he was. A picture of a snake that Bhardwaj posted on Instagram in June of last year caught the attention of keen-eyed herpetologist Zishan A. Mirza, who found himself unable to identify the species. It was evident that the specimen belonged to the kukri group of snakes, named for their teeth that are shaped like Nepali daggers. But it didn't resemble the common kukri snake of the region. So Mirza did what any diligent scientist would do. He reached out to Bhardwaj and asked him if he could catch one of the strange-looking snakes for researchers. Bhardwaj captured 2 of the snakes for Mirza and his team at Veer Narmad South Gujarat University. They confirmed through a series of tests that it was a new species of kukri snake, which has since been named Oligodon shurahensis. The western Himalayan region is underexplored, but experts do know that it's home to numerous unique species, which they've started to discover as they ramp up their efforts to uncover the area's biodiversity. Lost plane wreck. An amateur diver from Canada recently discovered the wreckage of a plane that dates back to World War II. He made this amazing discovery at the bottom of Lake Simon, Quebec. The diver didn't manage to identify the aircraft, but he did take some photographs of what looks like an airplane that's been at the bottom of the lake for a very long time. He apparently saw bodies, barrels of kerosene, and even whacked his head on the propeller. Because of these sensitive materials, he went straight to the police with what he discovered. He believes the aircraft is probably a seaplane used back in the 40s. Unfortunately, the Army and police have not been much help. The police are supposed to be carrying out checks and bringing in divers, but they haven't revealed where the plane could have come from, or if it had been used by the Department of National Defense. This could have something to do with what the diver thought were dozens of barrels of kerosene dumped around the vehicle. The seaplane may have been carrying hazardous materials during the war when it mysteriously fell into the lake and was forgotten. Fossilized fish. A team of Egyptian researchers from the American University of Cairo recently discovered the remains of fossils in the middle of the eastern desert, surprisingly close to where other researchers just discovered the 250 tombs. These fossils date back 56 million years, to a time when the Egyptian desert was underwater. The researchers found several different kinds of bony fish, things like deep-sea hatchetfish and moonfish. These are predatory sea creatures that still have relatives alive in our oceans today. But the really remarkable part is that these fish had been living in an extremely harsh environment. a time when the Earth saw a cataclysmic level of global warming that caused the oceans to get super hot. They remained hot for 200,000 years, with temperatures rising upwards of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. There was also no North Pole or South Pole, as the planet was dominated by nothing except rainforests. The discovery of the moonfish was quite interesting, because scientists know that moonfish are unique in that they can adapt to the temperature of the water around them. This means that while many other fish may have died because of rising ocean temperatures, certain species, like the moonfish, were able to adapt and thrive. Neolithic stone balls. Hundreds of carved stone balls dating as far back as 5,000 years have been found throughout Scotland and other parts of Europe. Their appearance varies, with some featuring intricate patterns and others bearing carved knobs, pyramids, and other designs. Most of the balls are similar in size, measuring roughly 2.75 inches in diameter. Experts haven't been able to figure out these Neolithic artifacts, but they're determined to try. The National Museum of Scotland recently announced that its researchers are trying to get to the bottom of the mystery through virtual technology by poring through hundreds of documents relating to discoveries of the stone balls and by searching for missing and undiscovered artifacts. Unfortunately, experts have limited data to work with. For example, while they know that many of the stone balls were found near Aberdeen, they do not know the exact locations of the discoveries. Additionally, some people who found these objects in the past likely underestimated their historical value, meaning there are probably some stone balls in the possession of families whose original owners overlooked their worth. Dr. Hugo Anderson Weimark, who is heading the research, told the Herald that the team is trying to track down a few lost stone balls that are known to exist, including one that was last seen in 1986 and another that went missing in 1908. So if you see something, let us know. He says there are probably a few others that got lost because people didn't know what they were or that they were important. The most recently discovered stone ball was found among a collection of flint tools in 2018. Anderson and his team hope that more will surface as their investigation unfolds, and reminded the public that Scottish law requires people to report archaeological discoveries, even if it's just a ball. Lost bodies. The owner of a Swiss ski resort was shocked when his workers came across a small collection of bodies that had been frozen in the ice for 75 years. This time they weren't sculptures, but actual real people. Employees of Switzerland's Glacier 3000 ski resort were out doing maintenance near the ski lifts when one of them noticed a large black rock that he thought looked a little out of place. As it turned out, it was extremely out of place. It also wasn't a rock. When he took a closer look, he realized he was staring at a dead body sticking out of the ice. Not just one body either, there were two of them. They belonged to Marcelin and Francine Dumoulin, who went missing almost a century ago. Amazingly, the crew at the ski resort knew immediately who the dead people were. The missing couple had been a legend at the ski resort ever since they mysteriously vanished without a trace. Nobody knew what happened to them back then, but they were assumed to be dead and gone. The couple had owned a farm and went missing while exploring the area. It was in August of 1942, and their families searched for them for over 2 months. But by the time winter showed up, the weather was so terrible that they had to give up. The couple left behind 7 children. Today, 2 of those kids are still alive. To finally know what happened to their parents has been a huge blessing. Since the discovery, the bodies, which honestly weren't much more than blackened bones at this point, were excavated from the mountain and given proper burials. Exploding trailer. Police in Castleton, Vermont rushed to the Windy Hollow mobile home park recently after receiving a call that a trailer had exploded with residents inside. They were relieved to find that the mobile home hadn't blown up, but they did find evidence of an explosion. There was a fire in the backyard with 13 propane tanks, 4 oxygen tanks, and 2 gas-powered chainsaws that had been thrown into it. Thankfully, nobody was injured in the blast, but a nurse hurt her ankle while running towards the scene to help. Numerous fire companies showed up at the property, but they were called off after police determined that the trailer itself wasn't on fire. Nearby, officers found 38-year-old Timothy Blanchard. He allegedly seemed drunk, which is perhaps the only possible reason someone might think that it's a good idea to throw highly explosive materials into a fire, because they're not in their right mind. Whoever committed this strange act put other people's lives in danger. namely those who live in the 7 mobile homes that were within 200 feet of the blast. Several residents reported feeling their home shake, and one mother was so terrified she grabbed her infant and took cover. Blanchard allegedly admitted to the act, but the case is still making its way through the court system. Only time will tell what consequences, if any, he'll serve for his senseless backyard fun. Wartime stimulants. People looking to lose weight and get into shape may unknowingly be ingesting experimental stimulant drugs from World War II. According to a new study, a stimulant called phenpromethamine has been showing up in sports supplements and weight loss supplements that are being used right now by millions of people. The reason this is a little alarming is that the stimulant was last sold in the 1940s as a nasal inhaler. It was ultimately withdrawn from the market in the 50s. The stimulant has never been approved for oral use and is banned from competitive sports, according to the World Anti-Doping Agency. During World War II, phenpromethamine was sold as Vonadrine. People would use it as a nasal inhaler to get a short-lived buzz with each inhale. As you can imagine, soldiers fighting in the war could have benefited from a sudden burst of energy. But after the war was over, the drug was considered dangerous for everyday use and prohibited. What it's doing now in ordinary weight loss supplements is anybody's guess. The scientists are mostly baffled by the fact that companies are getting away with it. According to clinical toxicology, studies have also shown that there are other prohibited stimulant drugs in weight loss supplements dating back to the 40s. Many of these companies are actually using cocktails of stimulants, in low doses, mind you, inside their supplements. Next time you take a pill for losing weight, remember you could be ingesting stimulants used by World War II-era soldiers. Pregnant mummy. In a shocking first, a pregnant mummy was discovered in Egypt. Archaeologists couldn't believe their eyes when they were scanning what they thought was the mummy of an ancient priest named Hor-Jehuti, and saw what appeared to be a small foot inside the mummy's abdomen. They then did a complete scan to confirm that yes, the mummy was pregnant at the time of death. She was mummified with the tiny fetus still sitting in her womb. This is now the first time a pregnant woman was found mummified, which has presented researchers with quite an interesting mystery. They still don't know who the woman was or why she was turned into a mummy with the baby still in her belly. Scientists have nicknamed her the Mysterious Lady of the National Museum in Warsaw. According to an archaeologist from the Polish Academy of Sciences, the fetus was not removed from the abdomen on purpose during the mummification process. As you may already know, all the internal organs are removed during this process to complete the transformation. But this time, they neglected to remove the unborn baby. Researchers are baffled as to why. It could have been an accident, part of some greater plan, or even just laziness on the part of the workers. As for where the mummy came from, she and her sarcophagus were donated to the University of Warsaw back in 1826. The name on the coffin was that of a male priest, but clearly something got switched. It wasn't until technology finally allowed them to research her properly in 2016 that they made all these new and unprecedented discoveries. James Ossuary. The James Ossuary is a limestone box made to hold bones that was made known to the public in 2002. Ossuaries were very common in Israel from around the 2nd century BC until the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But this one was special because it features an Aramaic inscription stating James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. If the box's contents are what the carving claims, it means they represent the earliest known written mention of Jesus Christ and the first known archaeological evidence of him, period. For historians and Christians alike, the discovery would be of major significance. But ever since the report was released, the James Ossuary has remained shrouded in controversy, including claims that the box itself is a genuine artifact, but that its inscription is a forgery. In this so-called forgery trial of the century, the ossuary's owner, Oded Golan, faced accusations that the carving was fake. 4 others were also accused of participating in the alleged scam. Golan and his co-defendants were acquitted in 2012, but not everyone is convinced of his innocence. In the years since, experts and critics have revisited arguments supporting and denying the ossuary's authenticity. It's hard to prove or disprove claims of forgery since the artifact's origins are only traceable to a certain point when it was purchased from an antique dealer. The Israel Antiquities Authority has made its mind up and believes the ossuary is fake, But some scholars have pointed out that the entire IAA panel consisted of members who were openly outspoken against any arguments in the ossuary's favor. As with most biblical discoveries, this artifact has led to much heated debate. So the question remains, is it real? Is it not? Who knows? Primeval Lake. A primeval lake has been discovered buried underneath about a mile of ice in Greenland. Scientists say this mysterious buried lake could hold secrets to the ancient climate of Greenland. The lake formed at a time when Greenland wasn't covered in even a scrap of ice. This was several million years ago. But because Greenland's ice is rapidly melting, the lake could once again be filled with water in the next handful of years. According to Guy Paxman from Columbia University, the landscape of Greenland is currently concealed and inaccessible. But with the new discovery of the lake, scientists have a rough idea of what the huge plot of land will look like once all the ice is gone yet again. Guy Paxman and his team discovered the lake in the first place thanks to radar technology, which is able to penetrate the icy surface and read the topography below. The lake is approximately 1.1 miles below the surface and stretches 2,700 square miles. It's roughly the size of Delaware and Rhode Island squished together. At its deepest point, the lake extends 800 feet down. Return of the barn owl. Until recently, the last confirmed sighting of a nesting barn owl family in the state of Wisconsin was 22 years ago. These birds are seen on every continent except Antarctica. And while they were once endangered, their worldwide numbers have revived. Yet they really don't seem to favor the badger state the way they used to. But why? Wisconsin's barn owl population decreased dramatically due to habitat loss, according to Ryan Brady, a conservationist with the state's Department of Natural Resources. He explained that the barn owl's preferred nesting sites, which include tree cavities and abandoned barns and buildings, became increasingly difficult to find in the state in recent years. This species also tends to favor warmer temperatures than you'll often find in America's dairyland, which is another reason they avoid Wisconsin. Between 1995 and 2000, only 3 barn owl nests were spotted throughout the state. I don't think they are the only ones that avoid Wisconsin for this reason. But it appears as though they're finally back. In early October, a family found a young barn owl that had fallen out of a dead tree in their backyard in La Crosse County. A closer look revealed that an entire family was living inside the tree. The rare bird was back. The family took the injured bird to get help while the rest of the owl family continued to nest, and they were eventually reunited with each other. It's hard to tell whether barn owls will return to Wisconsin in large numbers, but there's been an uptick in unconfirmed sightings in the southern part of the state, and it's a hopeful sign. If a breeding population is established, the species will be reconsidered for placement on the state's endangered and threatened species list. For now, the DNR is waiting to see what happens. Artifacts under the floor. Underneath the floorboards of a British hotel, construction workers doing renovations stumbled upon a fascinating discovery. While working at the Esplanade Hotel in Scarborough, a quiet little town on the northern coast of England, the workers were shocked to find loads of World War II-era artifacts. The hotel is considered a historic building, with the renovations being necessary to keep the place standing. But what the workers hadn't expected to find was a literal treasure trove of artifacts from World War II. It was on the first floor, hidden underneath one of the floorboards of a utility room. Workers uncovered an old Vaseline tin, crumbling packages of cigarettes, wrappers from chocolates, and old-timey toothpaste tubes. They also found handwritten love letters from between 1941 and 1944. The letters contained correspondence between a pair of lovers separated by miles and war. Sadly, the names are missing from the letters, and the owners of the hotel don't have a clue who they were or how to get a hold of their living relatives. It's believed that a British soldier was stationed at the hotel during World War II. The Esplanade Hotel was used as a rest stop between training exercises or deployment to the front lines. While stuck in the lonely confines of this remote place, the unknown soldier was corresponding with his lover wherever she lived. Amulet of the Sun God. In the Israeli desert, a couple of amateur hikers discovered a small scarab amulet that turned out to have a bizarre link to Ra, the Egyptian god of the sun. Experts have called the artifact the first of its kind, and something of a miracle, since it was unearthed by a random group of tourists from Jerusalem visiting archaeological sites in the Negev desert. Sure, similar amulets have been found all across the Mediterranean from ancient Egypt, but this particular one is unique. According to archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority, it dates back to the 9th or 8th century BC. The reason it's so strange is that 2,000 years ago, this type of amulet was used by the Egyptians and other people in the region, but never in Israel. It's the only one of its kind to be found in the country. The front of the amulet was fashioned into a scarab beetle, which in ancient Egyptian mythology was the manifestation of the sun god. The link between the beetle and the god actually originated as a misinterpretation. When ancient Egyptians saw newborn beetles emerging from balls of sheep dung, where a female beetle had previously laid her eggs, they thought it was an act of spontaneous creation. They thought the beetles were literally just creating themselves out of nothing. So they linked the beetle to the sun god, and all these thousands of years later, the scarab beetle is still synonymous with Egypt and their god of the sun. Headless statues. While conducting a routine excavation ahead of a building project east of Athens, archaeologists recently discovered headless marble statues of a woman and her servant in an ancient Greek cemetery. Dating back to the 4th century BC, the statues depict the woman seated in an elaborate chair, with a female servant standing beside her. The sculpture likely marked the woman's burial sometime before 317 BC, when the Athenian governor Demetrius of Phaleron outlawed the lavish grave markers. Grave monuments like this were common at the time and often featured people with their servants. In addition to not knowing who the women were, experts are unsure why their heads are missing. It's likely that the heads were accurate depictions of the people they represent, as it was customary in ancient Greece to mark graves with idealized faces. Excavations are ongoing, and the statue was transported to the Archaeological Museum of Vrana for safekeeping. Archaeologists are constantly finding more fragments and artifacts at the site, so we just have to wait and see what else they find. Entombed in ice. A tragic and shocking discovery was recently made in Russia after an extremely atrocious bout of winter weather, including freezing rain. A homeless man was on his way to the local cathedral when heavy rain and icy winds came out of nowhere. Everyone who could run inside did, but the homeless man was out of luck. He got stuck in the storm and was not found until much later, literally encased in a tomb of ice. The local people were shocked to discover the guy in the middle of the street, still wearing his mask for COVID-19, solid as an ice sculpture. They believe he was running to escape the storm but slowly turned into an icicle. He probably fell down, couldn't get up, and just kind of slowly froze to death. But believe it or not, this was not the first time such an incident has occurred. The caretaker of the cathedral, which the homeless man was trying to seek shelter in, told the Siberian Times that the year before, 5 people suffered similar fates. They were all vagrants found in the local park after being frozen solid by ice cyclones. This insanity seems to be happening every year in the Siberian city of Vladivostok, where it evidently gets so cold that you can freeze solid just trying to walk down the street. Lost medieval palace. At 81 years old, Robert Pohl decided to build a bungalow next to his home in the English town of Wiveliscombe, with plans to move into it and sell the house. He hired contractors and they got to work, only to soon be interrupted when they found the remains of wall foundations and floors buried in Mr. Pohl's backyard. What they turned out to be was surprising. Experts believe that the medieval ruins might be part of a lost 13th century building called Bishop's Palace. The palace is detailed in historical records, but until the recent discovery in Pohl's yard, experts had only managed to find a 14th century gate which stands nearby. Scholars have struggled to pinpoint the exact location of the site's various buildings. The complex was originally thought to be located east of Pohl's property, according to Somerset County archaeologist Bob Croft, who spoke with BBC News. This is the first time they've uncovered physical evidence of the palace, which was built as a hunting retreat for the Bishop of Bath and Wells sometime after 1256. By the 18th century, it had fallen into ruins. It continued to crumble, and soon enough, it wasn't even identifiable as a palace. Stones from the buildings were likely used in new construction projects, causing the site to fall further into obscurity. The team is currently working to preserve the structure. As exciting as the discovery is, Pohl seemed pretty exasperated by the whole ordeal, telling the press that the unforeseen circumstances were costing him more money than he expected to spend and delaying the construction of his bungalow. Sunken minesweeper. A minesweeper from World War II has been discovered sitting on the bottom of the Irish Sea. Archaeologists with Bournemouth University and scientists from Bangor University worked together to track down and document the mysterious vessel, which they had previously thought was a wrecked submarine. The teams used multi-beam sonar data to identify the sunken vessel as the HMS Mercury. The vessel was originally a ferry built in 1934, but was requisitioned by the British Admiral back in 1939 for use as a minesweeper. Its duty was to detect and remove mines around the British Isles, keeping the water safe for friendly vessels. Less than 1 year into its service, the HMS Mercury was trying to clear a mine when the thing got too close to its hull, detonated, and completely annihilated the ship. Attempts were made to bring the ship back to shore, but it flooded too quickly and sank. Luckily, the crew was able to be rescued, but there was nothing that could be done for the HMS Mercury. Thanks for watching! Which of these discoveries from World War II do you think is the most interesting? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already for more amazing discoveries. See you next time! Bye!